The British Empire was lucrative but expensive. Controlling around a quarter of the world at the empire's height required manpower and money. To raise the money, there were many cases of the British taxing their colonial subjects. Famously, when Britain colonized the 13 colonies in America, they taxed stuff like stamps and tea. But probably one of the most infamous taxes in British history was the Indian salt tax. At one point, India was effectively ruled by a private company known as the British East India Company. During this period, the company made a lot of money by imposing taxes on Indian salt. In the 19th century, salt was extremely important not just as a nutrient or for seasoning foods, but also as a form of preservative. Before the invention of devices like fridges, it was essential. So they made a lot of money off of this tax, and when the British took direct control of India from the company in 1858, they kept the tax in place precisely because of how lucrative it was. While the tax evolved over the years of British rule, it was all around infamous. Famously, Gandhi protested the salt tax through peace marches and got arrested over it. With the salt tax being so important to the British and so hated by the Indian populace, it's no surprise that they went to great lengths to preserve it and keep the money flowing. One of those ways was through, of all things, a hedge. A giant, singular hedge that stretched all the way across the center of India. How did a giant hedge help the British Empire make money off of salt? We'll learn the brief history of the Great Hedge of India in this video. But first, here's a shout out to this video's sponsor, Ridge. Ridge has always been devoted to making durable, space-saving gear, and now they're celebrating 10 years of providing excellent products. Now, I've already discussed how much I've enjoyed their wallet, having all of my cards and cash kept in a slim design with a cool blue metallic casing. I've also already discussed how much I've enjoyed their key case, being able to keep all of my keys in a Swiss Army knife-like design to where now I never mix them up or feel them stabbing me in my pocket. Now, Ridge is offering a daily driver kit, a deal where you can get a matching wallet and key case combo in the right design for you. If you go to ridge.com/emperor, you can right now save up to 40% through March 26th. And hey, if for some reason you don't like it within 99 days, you can send it back for a full refund. But honestly, I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy them. I know I do. That's ridge.com/emperor. Get your wallet and key case today, and thanks to Ridge for sponsoring this video. The administration of British India was complicated. You had areas that were under direct British colonial rule, and then areas that were called princely states. Basically a bunch of areas technically ruled by local Indian princes, but were basically strong-armed into doing what the British wanted. What this meant was that since these princely states were technically their own countries, they would still have customs and border checks. It was at these border checks that the British first taxed Indians over salt. Cross the border with salt? Pay up. If someone tried to mine their own salt directly inside one of the princely states, they'd still eventually make their way to the border to sell it, so they'd still have to pay up. In many parts of Europe at the time, it was normal for customs and border checkposts to have hedges near the gate. Not only were they decorative and in style, but they also served as a mini fence to direct people to the gate, so that way it was harder to get around the checkpoints. The British brought this tradition to the same border checks in India, but with the huge size of India, there was still a smuggling problem. In the 1840s, India was still under company rule, and so the issue of how to deal with the smuggling was not yet something the British Parliament would discuss. Instead, the issue fell to the British East India Company's Inland Customs Department. They came up with a plan to set up custom checkpoints across central India that would be about a mile apart. While this was a lot of checkpoints, it was also a lot of gaps. As the salt tax revenue heavily increased across the 19th century, the issue of smuggling was taken more seriously. While customs hedges were used, the issue was that they were known as dry hedges, meaning they were technically dead. This meant that not only were they more easily susceptible to damage, but that it would be creating ironically higher maintenance costs to fix. The gaps also called for British soldiers to be patrolling near the custom lines within 2 miles away. Not only were custom hedges imperfect barriers with many gaps, but they weren't exactly financially helping things. Things would change after direct British rule took over India from the company. In 1867, a man named Alan Octavian Hume was made Commissioner of Inland Customs, and he came up with a solution to try to stop smuggling and cut the costs of maintaining custom hedges. Instead of a bunch of scattered dry hedges requiring constant British patrols, there would be a singular, united living hedge. Living hedges meant much easier and cheaper maintenance, and easier expansion in size. If all of the customs hedges could be connected into a singular great hedge, no more gaps. Such a project still required some extra details, such as irrigated canals to feed a living hedge, or the importation of foreign soil in spots it would have trouble growing. But Hume thought the project would be worth it. Within a few years, this new great hedge was grown to be 12 feet or 3.7 meters high, as well as 14 feet or 4.3 meters thick. Add some thorns and you had quite a formidable hedge that was nearly impossible to go through and very difficult to climb. While not every part of this great hedge would end up being a singular living plant as envisioned, a significant portion was, and many already built-in dry hedges helped extend the barrier, cheapening the cost of maintenance and patrols. Across the next decade, the line of the hedge would occasionally shift, but it would mostly grow. At the Great Hedge's height in 1878, the total line of dry and living hedge amounted to a barrier that was 1,621 miles long, or 2,608 kilometers. For a comparable distance, that's roughly comparable if there was a similar hedge built from Lisbon, Portugal to Berlin, Germany, or from Dallas, Texas to New York City. Peak maintenance of the hedge required a staff of 14,188 people, although it did eventually decline to an even 10,000 as the hedge connected and matured. But it did seem to be effective at greatly limiting the smuggling, as several thousand were caught and arrested. However, the hedge would be abandoned the next year in 1879. Why? A few reasons. Firstly, the resources taken for the hedge impacted nearby local areas, which upset the populace. Secondly, there was now a growing issue of bribery and corruption for the staff running the hedge, which was seen as a pressing issue. Thirdly, in the late 1870s, India experienced a significant famine in which massive crop failures led to the death of around 6 to 9 million people. And the significant tax on salt and other important goods helped restrict access to needed nutrition many poor Indians needed, which exacerbated the famine. While there were minimal efforts of famine relief raised by the colonial government and some cases of charity, it was not enough, which led to an understandable outrage. The British then did two things in response. Firstly, they did minor tax reforms where 29 taxed goods, including sugar, were removed, bringing something closer to a free trade policy across British India. The second thing was seizing the salt mines to salt the tax directly at the source instead of relying on the customs line. This meant that the hedge was now irrelevant, so they saved maintenance costs and abandoned it. They just let it rot. And to make up for additional costs of their minimal famine relief, they raised the salt tax in northern India. Well, I guess they didn't completely learn their lesson after all, did they? Thanks for watching. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe. You can also support this channel through my Patreon or channel memberships.